Hello, everybody. It is Richard Harris here with Sales Hacker, and I've got a fantastic uh, webinar with folks that I'm really excited to talk with and learn from today. First, I want to introduce Tom Way, who is the Managing Director of S3, or the Managing Director of the UK and Ireland. So, Tom, if I just made you a worldwide director, congratulations on the promotion.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll take that back.
I've also got Tom Castley, who is the VP of Sales for the UK, and is it Europe also, Tom?
Yes, yeah, effectively.
Yeah, and Europe from Outreach. So we're excited to talk to both of you, and just to make it easier, everybody else can call me Tom for the rest of the webinar. So we are, on a more serious note, though, we're here to talk about something that's really important that every single person is thinking about, experiencing, going through, and that's this leadership in these difficult times, particularly sales leadership, right? What are we doing to really encourage the positivity that's necessary while also being cognizant and recognizing what's happening in the world around us? So that's the main piece. Please feel free to go into the chat box and introduce yourself, name your company if you want. Obviously, please put questions in the Q&A section or in the chat box. We'll get to those as we go through. We do tend to try and do questions throughout while they're relevant, but we'll also save a little bit of time at the end. So the first thing I want to talk about is just leadership, right? So this thing just happened, right? And to a certain extent, we saw it coming to a certain extent, but then all of a sudden the world changed, right? Stay home, do this, make this adjustment. And so I'm just going to go ahead and start with Tom Way. As you think about leadership and approaching this within your organization, what were the first couple of things you guys sort of decided to try, or you figured out? Maybe you kind of knew.
Yeah, I think during time of sort of crisis, and I think we quite quickly sort of worked out that this was going to be something that was going to last for a significant amount of time. I think myself and my leadership team thought about one thing in that immediate crisis period, which was about remaining calm. I think as leaders, it's hugely important that our employees, our customers, our suppliers will be looking to us as leaders to project sort of a sense of calm throughout what is obviously going to be a very difficult and uncertain situation. And I think that for me was the first thing to look at through my experiences of sort of 2008, 2009. It was very clear how people reacted and what their legacy was post the crisis. And I think people will be reacting in the same way this time around. If people project calm and confidence and can maintain that throughout, they'll sort of bounce back far stronger than those that are sort of losing their rag, making snap decisions and panicking. So that was the first one, staying calm. And then I think linked to that is that confidence piece. I think you have to be calm, but not sort of still water calm. You have to project that sort of confidence that you're going to be able to see something through successfully with a sort of minimum amount of hurt to the company. So I think they were the sort of two areas that we looked at first, is regardless of how deep this is going to cut and how long this is going to last, we maintain that we're going to remain calm, but also very confident here if we want our employers and so forth to follow suit.
Mr. Castley, how about you?
Well, that makes it tough to follow, doesn't it? Great answers, Tom. For me, and kind of when I look at kind of, sales, I'm going to focus predominantly around sales leadership because of my role and looking at what other sales leaders have done and what we've done here at Outreach. Number one is over and above what Tom talked about was motivation. Motivation is key. It's very easy for people to get down very quickly. Not only are we talking about kind of the impact to our sales careers, our sales forecasts, our pipeline, but it's actually the personal impact of now I'm working from home. If I've been office based previously, that's a huge impact. So learning how to motivate, and we've seen over the last few weeks huge innovation with regards to the use of technology, and also a huge investment of time and effort from management and leadership teams to be possibly even more engaged with their staff than they were when we were office-based, because it's now a conscious effort in that.
So
Yeah, go on.
I always like to dig down and
Yeah.
press a little bit on what I call buzzwords, right?
Mm.
Motivation is good. Like, I get it. I understand
Yeah.
it. What did you guys do to better motivate the team or encourage the team?
Yeah, so it's not, and I'm glad you pressed me on it. So it's not about, we've been motivating staff for forever. When I'm talking about motivating, it's actually maintaining the same level of motivation. And a lot of that comes from, not kind of that buzzwordy approach, but think about, now is not the time to canvass everybody and ask what they think is a good idea to do over the coming weeks. They're looking for strong leadership. They are looking for a single voice.
So what does that mean? So again, you're giving me more buzzwords. I'm going to press you guys hard on this because I think this is
brilliant.
And to a certain extent, and I'll be the first to say, we kind of don't necessarily know either. Like, there's definitely some experimenting going on, I think, for people. But what kinds of things? And Tom, feel free to jump in on this. Think about, how did you maintain calm? How do you maintain that? Like, were there did meetings change? Were they more frequent, less often? Fewer big meetings, but lots of stand-ups. Like, what were the things y'all were doing?
So for me, this was, you've got to be consistent, right? So for me, meetings that would usually maybe happen bi-weekly, I have a meeting with my leadership team for half an hour every other day, right? And we talk about the same agenda every day. And that is about the movement in our core metrics that we measure as a sales business, right? To give people a bit of context, we're a STEM staffing provider, recruitment for those in the UK, staffing for those in the US, and we focus on placing people into contract jobs. So obviously we look at our core metrics there, and we reviewing them every other day to maintain that we were being consistent and measuring against the same thing each time. The other piece there about remaining calm and confident for me is linked to communication, right? Leaders will ultimately win and lose throughout this based on their communication style, right? If you chop and change, if you flip-flop, if you say one thing on a Monday and that's changed on a Thursday, you're dead meat. And I think this is where, as leaders, we need to relentlessly communicate during this period. In order to avoid rumors developing, right? And I think there's a lot of that, particularly in sales.
Let me ask you. So I definitely agree with sort of the over communication, right? Like constant leadership but to a certain extent, and I love the fact that we need to have some level of consistent messaging. But in a world where we're not necessarily understanding what's happening around us, do you think that sometimes it's the fact that we are communicating every day or every other day helps keep us calm, even if our message does have to change a little bit, right? When you go from here to here, because of a pivot in the government or a pivot in the way you're going to start doing things, does the message ever change a little bit, or is it like half the message is consistent, the other half may be new ideas?
Yeah. For me, I think that largely depends on what it is that you do. Ultimately, I don't think many companies' strategy will have ultimately changed, or what their purpose is as an organization will have changed. And if it has, I think that's probably quite dangerous. Our strategy has stayed the same and our purpose has remained the same. And we're trying to link that back to the current situation, right? So for me, that is constantly communicating that, guys, right, we're at the center of two mega trends here. And I'm sure that every business can sort of shape this in the way that they want. We're talking about flexible working as a mega trend, right? That's right here, that's right now. We're talking about STEM, right? STEM's going to see us through this. STEM's going to see us out of this, right? So constantly relaying our core messages back to the business, and that, I think, itself sort of creates confidence. And as salespeople, we can probably shape that with any sort of product or whatever it is that we're offering. What is it, and how is what we are doing going to help, in some small part, get us through this global crisis? And I think that brings a certain amount of togetherness. Yeah, I think from a motivation perspective, I think a lot of companies, and probably ours as well, sort of fell foul quite early. Is that right? Okay, we've got to motivate a workforce here working from home. For us, we've been quite archaic, right? Probably 10% of our workforce used to work from home, and over the course of a 2-week period, we were able to mobilize 4,000 troops to work from home remotely. And so that was a very new concept for us. right? So people were going over and beyond trying to create sales competitions, sales targets, right? They're working their rear ends off to sort of try and keep people motivated and keep people engaged. By the end of week 2, people were bored, right? So I think making sure again that motivation links back ultimately to the output that you want people to achieve, right? Salespeople work their pay plan, right? So ultimately we need to be motivating people and creating belief in people that they can still achieve. I think that's key to the motivational piece.
Great. Tom, I know I kind of interrupted you because you
Yes,
sort of had a list of things. So let's come back to your list. You know, motivation was the number one thing. What was the second thing you guys really started focusing on at Outreach?
yeah. So we talked about this clear messaging. So, and the comparison there is, with the media as it is today, you've got, the sources of the masses in social media and various different news channels taking different angles. That creates confusion, and from confusion comes a lack of motivation or a clarity of vision and message. So for us here at Outreach and in well-run organizations, they've just absolutely ensured that there is a consistency of communication channel. We know when it's happening. We know who it's coming from. And there's no room for kind of, translation in that message. And that gives people a sense of safety. In the first instance, if you think it might have taken a week for some individuals or companies, it might have taken 3 weeks, but the first reaction is the survival reaction. Even in our core cortex of our brains, we're working out, are we in danger? And so you communicate very differently to when somebody is in survival mode, when the company or the individual is in survival.
What was the message you guys were thinking about? And then, I want to hear this about sort of this internal message. But then how do you also translate that externally to your prospects and customers, right? But internally, how was Outreach? Look, I know Manny, and he's a phenomenal leader, and he's very conscious of the human existence, right? As a person. He presses hard, but he's also conscious of the human existence.
And he's been exemplary, and the team around him. Ultimately, it's the people are our first priority. 2 is we've got a plan. Oftentimes, you don't need to necessarily share the detail of that. People just want to know that they can stop thinking about it. We've got it covered. There is a plan. We're going to let you know what that is in the next 3 days. Okay, good. I can stop thinking about that. That is helping to address that survival kind of reaction. The second phase.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The second phase is the overcome, and I'm seeing that across the market at the moment. So people are now getting used to this new normal, both in prospects and in supplying organizations, and they're starting to work out, well, okay, how do we navigate through this? I spoke a few weeks ago about this notion of, I actually believe it's like a catapult at the minute. We're pulling back on the stress and strain of the organization in a minute or two. For a lot of businesses, it's going to be like a game of hungry hippos. You remember the board game? There's potential out there.
You're aging us all, Tom.
Yeah, well,
really old.
But it's and the potential is this huge change that has impacted everybody is a huge opportunity for anybody supplying a product or a service within certain markets. There are obviously some which are going to take a while to recover, but many of the people on the line are going to be thinking, hang on a minute, I've been begging for a change in my industry, and this is the time to go after it. We need to work that out.
Yeah. What about messaging? So externally, right? And we're starting to see this shift, right? The first, and we hear it all the time, lead with empathy, right? Which is true, but it's kind of like, if you weren't leading with empathy before this happened, you got a much bigger problem, right? Like that's a core thing. So how did you guys each handle the messaging outward to your prospects and customers?
Yeah, and just on that, I think going back to to what Tom was saying there around how do we deal with things first up, but I think at a time of crisis, and I think we called it at the beginning the sort of crisis management of this, the most important thing to pretty much every business there was cash, right? Talking about cash and empathy in the same sentence is often quite emotive, right? But the first thing that we did, like I'm sure many other organizations, was to protect our cash position, right? And I think that was obviously very, very key. And I think sort of managing that process now through what a recovery might look like is sort of quite an interesting place to be in. We don't have all the answers around that, but we're in that. We called it sort of that crisis management. We're now in that sort of emergency relief section, and our CEO is an ex-military guy, and he says that the ability of organizations now to react in the best possible way is based on the strength of our reserves, right? And that is basically the people that we have in our organization now and how we mobilize.
I get it. But I want to get out of the conceptual side of it, and I understand what I think people are joining here for is they want to hear tactics, right? They want to hear, I love the fact that we need to protect cash. I think we all saw that, right? The first 2 weeks there was a lot of protecting of cash, which unfortunately, also had a human toll in terms of jobs. But coming back to the point of messaging, right? What was your messaging a month ago? What's your messaging now?
Yeah, so for me, and I know you kind of pushed us on that empathy element. I too have a bit of an issue with empathy. For me, it's authentic. If you didn't have an authentic message before this, you're not suddenly going to make that authentic. It just becomes a performance. People saw through that, and the backlash on various social networks was significant, where people were acting out of pattern. Empathy comes from authenticity. So in that first instance, what good organizations did was they tried to work out, well, okay, how can we serve the larger good? So you saw Max and Scott launch Get Hired, which was saying, well, actually, there's a bunch of outreach customers who are hiring like mad, and there's a bunch who are unfortunately either furloughing or having to make people redundant. And there was a movement of human capital, and could we create an avenue for that? So that's where the Outreach Get Hired program came from.
Yep, I love that.
Yeah, a second one over here in the UK through the Sales Impact Academy, which provides an online live training kind of environment. What we did was we invested to make that free of charge for 2 months. And so all of their training for SDRs, sales folks, sales leaders, founders, marketeers became free of charge. And they also opened up a webinar program called In This Together. That's great. Taking on very topical subjects. So for example, there's a legal firm talking on Thursday about the legal ramifications for founders around furloughing, redundancy, bringing people back, what that looks like. That advice is worth thousands of pounds. That's kind of an authentic showing of kind of Outreach's core values. An organization should be thinking at the moment, if they can, about how do we reinforce that brand. That's a great tactic.
Yeah, I guess just my 2 cents on that, Richard, is what was the message pre-COVID, right? I think again things were looking pretty good. Let's I guess in the UK at least there was a little bit of certainty around our government. There was a bit more of a plan. Brexit wasn't until the end of the year, and things were looking okay, right? The message there was around, right, how are we going to sort of maximize sales, maximize revenue? The message now is how are we going to get closer to customers? What are our tactics now to stay closer to our customers? You asked about tactics, right? And again, I don't have all the answers here, but we're looking at the moment is why are we sticky? Why do customers want to use us? We're having to look at our services, right? Are the services that we're currently offering our clients and our customers, are they the right ones while we work through this period of crisis? And are they the right ones when we get out the back of it? And whilst we've got a bit of time, because we've seen a drop off in sales, we need to make sure that we're aligning our sales, our services to what the customers actually want. And I think that's where the opportunity piece is. The bounce back, I don't believe, is going to be a return to the normal. The bounce back is going to be what work have organizations done to make sure that their services are right for what customers want in the future, right? So to put that in perspective, we're a STEM staffing company, right? What's the future of the face-to-face interview? For an organization that arranges 10,000 interviews a week that happen face-to-face, how are we going to cater for that moving forward? That's a challenge that we have internally at the moment. What do customers' interview processes look like, and how do we influence that? How do we manage that? How do we get consultants to sell to our clients that face-to-face interview process doesn't need to happen anymore, right? And I think these are the challenges that we face, and this is how we're aligning our teams to react.
It's funny because I see that and I talk to people like you, Tom Way, all the time, and I'm like, where have you been? Like I've been doing face-to-face interviews for the last, I mean, Zoom interviews for the last 5 to 10 years. Like it's kind of like, it's out there, and I love the fact that you're being forced into that shift. I think it's great because we're finally realizing how much more effective and efficient we can be with our time, which then leads back, I think, to quality time at home, which I think is a really important piece for a lot of people, right? I do want to share. I know a couple people were asking about some tactics for the customers and the prospects. One of the things I've been teaching people is to just ask the customer, what kind of customer are you? Right? Or your prospects. Hey, we've got certain group of people who are just heads down, trying to, stay focused, keep the lights on, right? I've got some people who are heads down, but they're doing some research. They're trying to figure out the next move. And then you could say, look, I got other customers who want to, who are just moving right ahead, right? There's not a whole lot of change for them. Just so I adjust appropriately for you, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, which one are you so I don't bug you, right? I think the key is trying to meet your prospect and customer in their space. And we don't know what their space is right now, right? We're starting to see it, right? So I just want to make sure we give some tactics for people who are listening on things. There's this one thing that I know, Tom Castley, you talked about control, right? In some of the notes we were talking about earlier of like, controlling what you can control.
Yeah.
Tell me what that meant for you guys at Outreach. And again, definitely want to hear the internal side of it from a leadership perspective, but then also externally.
Yeah, so so that messaging certainly came out during that kind of the survival response, which was helping people to focus on. So you've got, and some of this comes from Mark Koziklo, who you'll know is just got this amazing brain of thoughts. I'm normally pretty good at, normally pretty good at sharing other people's thoughts rather than my own. So he was talking about, you've got the stuff that matters and you've got the stuff that you can control. And really, it's only at the intersection of those 2 points that you should even waste any more than 5 minutes thinking about. And so that's just being ruthlessly efficient with your time. Otherwise, you can just go off in spirals and circles. And internally, we did a ton of that. So what matters? What can we control? There's lots of things going on outside of the business. Externally, though, this is about at its core a sales organization that across verticals and across different segments had messaging that very quickly in terms of its style. We talked about this, authentic empathy. What can we do to help? How can we help you take more advantage of what you've already got? How can we help you without even our products, which is the kind of the get hired stuff and what have you, to now coming into this overcome and capitalize phase, which you're right, is overcome for me is people moving off the pause button and saying, look, the world's going to be different in 3 or 4 months time. I need to make sure that my business is in exactly the right place to take advantage of that. And the capitalize is potentially even as far as a reset button. We were talking before this call, I was speaking to an organization that had a field sales team. They're out in their cars, driving to see customers, and the calls that they were having in the previous weeks was actually canceling those lease agreements on cars, saying, hey, we're moving to Zoom-based sales reps now. We're able to do 6-7 calls a day, still selling hundreds of thousands of pounds or dollars worth of solutions. Whereas before we were doing like 6 calls a week and paying hotels and travel expenses and everything else as well. For a lot of salespeople, I would encourage you to think about this, that how many sales calls start with what's causing you to look to change at the moment. We spend half an hour of a sales call trying to find out what the issue is that they're trying to address. Well, there's one big common issue for most organizations at the moment, that they're getting used to remote working. They're getting used to the after effects of COVID and the limitations on travel. That's going to cause 100% of organizations to change. What you need to think about as a sales rep is, how does my messaging, my solution, and my pitch need to alter to provide solutions to the environment that you now find yourself in.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think some of that comes back to, and I've been preaching this, aside from that cash flow thing, one of the things I did for clients, and I've talked to other people, is that they just start talking to their customers, right? I was all about, your CEO needs to spend more time with customers than they ever did before, right?
Yeah.
It's probably the second most important thing they could be doing, aside from just to Tom Way's point, like, how do we protect the cash flow in the business and start to plan? But talking to your customers, ask them what they're doing and ask them how you can help. I've put out there 100 times, like, hey, how can I help you if you need a lunch and learn? I'm not going to charge you for it. I'm just here to, like, help you motivate your team a little bit, right? Like, I can, go off on a rant about something because that's what people know I do, or I can give you some training on different things. And a lot of people were like, no, Richard, we got it covered, but we really appreciate the effort. And I think that's really important. I think that's super, super important. How about you, Tom? Like, you think about the things you can control versus the things you can't control. Tom Way, sorry. What are the things y'all focus? What are the things you maybe let go of a little bit?
Yeah, I think the control piece is interesting, isn't it? It's being able to demonstrate control is obviously quite key. When things are happening quickly, no one may have that control, but as a leader, you can try and assume control, right? Which is quite an interesting place to be. In terms of the things that we have to let go of, sort of personally, I think, like a bit like the other Tom was saying, is how do we operate in a world where we encourage people to meet people face to face, where we visit customer sites, we go and visit customer plants, and so forth. And now we're unable to do that. And just quickly on the point that you made earlier, trying to get a scientist in a lab a job via a video interview. It has never happened before for me in my 15 years of experience. So changing and demonstrating this to a customer is our biggest challenge at the moment, right? So the education piece for us is so key. So to Tom's point earlier, it's all very well having a new strategy about how you plan to do business in a different way, but that has a massive impact on the way that you sort of develop and train your people to do that in the best way, which for us is something that we're working through at the moment. Our sales reps aren't adept at selling as effectively virtually as they were in person, right? And so for us, that's a big challenge because we're not that strong at that. So that's providing a big challenge. And in terms of sort of demonstrating control through that, what is it that we're controlling there? We're trying to control the conversations that they're having. We're trying to control the reaction from the customer. We're trying to control the level of learning and development that we don't have. And I think it's also fine to sort of admit that we don't have all of that in place. We're working through it, and showing empathy with our customers there is as important as showing empathy with our staff, right? No one can claim to sort of be able to demonstrate complete control around what's going on at the moment because we just don't know. And admitting that to our customers has shown that it's a far better tactic than trying to sort of claim that we do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if, if your business customers are going to have to sort of go the way of real estate and start making those virtual tours of their facilities and their labs, right? So that candidate can sort of get a sense of what that looks like, right? So it's interesting to see just, what seems so simple to me is not so simple to others. And so I find that very fascinating when you have to stop and think about those things. What, how did you, and I don't know if either of you went through this, or maybe you have friends who went through this, but for people who had to and may still have to go through this of, like, making those adjustments to personnel, which are super hard, right? Like, that is not an easy thing. How do you explain that? How did you take leadership into that position? Is there anything you can share on that?
I mean, I can start with that. I mean, obviously, being quite UK specific, those that might be aware, the government have come in with an assistance program, right? There were certain companies that had started to axe staff before the government had even launched an assistance program, right? They're not looking too pretty right now. So that's a classic thing about being calm and being confident. Don't panic, don't rush to a decision. I think we've certainly taken our time around any sort of workforce optimization that we might need to do. I think the key thing there, it might sound obvious, but I think it's a good reminder to everyone, is the first thing you need to do is take all emotion out of any of the decision-making process. And I think we've certainly seen that where we might need to make adjustments, we look at where we currently see underperforming areas, and they were underperforming areas pre-COVID. Right. The only reason we weren't making decisions on those is because we pretended that we didn't have time, or there was an emotional attachment to individuals or teams or business units that we didn't have to make a call on. So I think that, again, if we take the optimistic view at the moment around right sizing and workforce optimization, it might just force the hand a little bit about decisions that we as businesses haven't been prepared to take when things are going significantly better.
Yeah, but isn't that creating a convenient excuse? Isn't that a convenient excuse if I have to take the emotion out of the decision? Like, oh, well, I get to blame COVID. I'm really sorry about that. Like,
no,
that's.
I think I think it doesn't. I don't think you blame COVID, but I think COVID forces the hand.
Totally agree that it forces the hand. I just think you have to actually. I just have a different opinion, which is you got to lean into the emotion, and you got to say, Tom, I'm really sorry. Like, this is not my. Nobody likes this decision. And it sucks for you, and it sucks for us. And unfortunately, our hand is being forced, but I would certainly take a more emotional approach to it, to recognize that human on the other side of it. But I'm also not in the staffing industry, right? So I don't see it, right? I don't have to go through this as often as other people do. Yeah. So you make more of a science.
And that's, I guess my emotion point there is that I think quite often in a number of organizations, there are people and business units remain because people have shown loyalty, and people have been good at that job 5 years ago. Whereas I think that at the moment, businesses can't afford that luxury. So when I say take emotion out of it, we're looking at, right, okay, what sort of performance management do we have in place? How strictly are we working to that? How clearly are we monitoring people's objectives? And ultimately, there now has to be a consequence if they're not being met. And I think sometimes during good market conditions, the attention that we pay to performance management, the attention that we pay to sort of setting very clear objectives for people is not always measured in the same way that we as organizations have to now, right? If we're not measuring people against very clear objectives right now, then I think that will shoot us all in the foot.
Yeah, and kind of to Tom Way's point there, when he's saying, taking emotion out of it, I'm sure every leader in every business, however they've come up with a decision, is feeling very emotional about it. None of us start in a leadership position wanting to have a negative impact on anybody's lives. But ultimately, if you'd end up being, just having so much stress and strain if you were carrying that emotion into every conversation you had with folks. For me, there was a quote last week from PwC that talked about organizations overreacting to some of this, which shows this knee-jerk response. They talked about don't burn muscle, burn fat. In other words, don't cut into the core of your business. And also, I love the metaphor, because you don't want to lose too much weight too quickly. You want to take a balanced approach. The good tactics I've seen organizations doing recently, one is, immediately there's a HBR article, a Harvard Business Review article from 2008, which I'll find via Sales Hacker, a way to share, talks about the response of various organizations through the last 3 recessions and what the traits were of those organizations that did really well. So I'll find a way of sharing that. But what came out of that was, cash is king. So put a pause on hiring rather than getting rid of staff. I've seen a couple of technology companies move all of their sales commissions to held rather than paid. So everybody's going to get it. They just want to hold on to the cash for a couple of months to ensure that the cash position is right. And when I've spoken to those reps, the way that's been communicated, they've got it. They're keeping the choice is you either pay everybody's commissions and you lose a third of the sales team, or everybody gets to stay and they work together and they muck in on it. Other things that I've seen work really well is leaning into the parts of the business that they believe are going to perform coming out the other side. So not stopping something, but just rediverting resources to something that they know is going to work out the other side. That to me is tactical leadership.
I'm going to disagree with you on that.
Yeah.
I get the philosophy of hold the commission.
Yeah.
But respectfully, people are going to remember when we come out of this recession, people are going to remember how they were treated.
Yeah.
The company is responsible for maintaining a positive cash position at all times and be prepared. So if you hold my commission, let's say the CEO doesn't take a pay cut. That's not fair, because the CEO, the executive team, is making a whole lot more money than a sales team, way more money. And so to sit here and tell me you're going to take away my livelihood, fine, you can do that. But don't be surprised if those people are going to be the first to go, because people are going to remember you, how you treated them during this recession. And it's not to say that you can't have a little bit of this kumbaya, hey, we're all in it together. But what are you doing about the marketing people? What are you doing about the engineers? Are they getting their money being held back? Because I would definitely, like, you can tell, I'd be pissed. I'm a salesperson.
Yeah, and I don't know the detail for this particular organization, but when speaking to the people that I spoke to, clearly there had been some really effective communication. My assumption is that there's measures being made across the entire organization, because they were okay with it. And the skill there, that's the point of leadership, is you've got to work out what is the temperature of my business, and how can I look at my cash position. The staffing costs will and always will remain, a significant part of that.
Yeah. And believe me, I'll flip-flop. I'll say, look, if you come to me and say, look, I can either do this or lay off half of you, I can convince, like I can see it. But, I'm going to turn around, great, I want 4% interest on everything you hold. I want compounding interest on a daily rate, like a credit card,
and you want the smallest quota and the biggest territory. Yeah. I've managed reps like that before.
Give me my quota and territory, I'll crush my number. But I do actually, this brings up another question I saw someone ask earlier. How have you seen quotas adjusted, right? Are people trying to sort of come in and kind of, look, the business definitely has to stay open. You can't have no quota. I've seen some companies do that. How does an organization, and Tom Wade, this may come to you because you're on the hiring side, how does the company make those adjustments in what's hopefully perceived as a fair and meaningful way?
Yeah, no, it's a very topical one for us at the moment, because to this point we haven't adjusted anybody's quota or target. But we're coming towards the end of our sort of first half of the year, so we're reforecasting at the moment. So I think what our plan is as an organisation is to look at what the new normal has looked like over the last 6 weeks, and sort of take a gauge on that when we get to the end of May. So we'll then have sort of 8 or 9 weeks worth of data throughout the sort of COVID crisis and reset expectation based on that. So I think that's why we've done nothing to this point. And again, very blunt conversations. We will not do anything. We make no exceptions to targets set in the first half of the year. We won't flex anything. This is an exceptional event. Our senior leadership team have taken 20% pay cut. We're not paying the statutory increase for our support teams this year. We've been very clear on that. The messaging's been very clear. But I think, again, knee-jerk reactions might have said, let's adjust targets quickly to keep people motivated. I think that would have had the biggest adverse effect on this. So again, I go back to my opening point. Remain calm and remain confident. Don't change quota. Don't change targets until you're far clearer around the state of this sort of economy before doing so.
What's your thought around that? Hey, adjusting targets and quotas may have had a demotivating effect. That's a fascinating conversation. Like, I haven't thought that one through.
It shows panic.
It shows, I'm a sales guy.
Yeah.
I'm a sales guy.
I think it shows panic and lack of a plan. I guess as a leader to sort of change somebody's targets or to alter somebody's targets because an event of this magnitude would show that you're either there's no trust, or it doesn't explain anything. It's very temporary, and I think that you have to take.
Let me push back on you, because I've been on the opposite side of that, where world events, the economy, my competitor out of business. Guess what my executive team did? They raised my quota, right? They shrink the territory, raise the quota, right? So I'm not saying it's not something you should explore, and I think every company has to look at it differently, but I'm still not convinced that changing quotas creates panic when there's a survival mentality, right? When people are running to the store to buy toilet paper, and you're not going to lower my quota, again, I sort of come back to, well, people are going to remember.
Yeah, Richard, you got to, there is there's a lead time, or a lag rather, between, there's deals which have already been closed for the year. There's probably, and again, we have to be careful here. I come from the technology industry, the SaaS industry, so there's a certain way that those deals come in and way quotas and plans are set together. Different industries are done in different ways. I'm with Tom Way on this one. Is a knee-jerk reaction on quotas comes across as, wow, okay, well, what are we doing here? That's kind of do, plan, do, rather than actually let's think about it and wait. There's nothing wrong with resetting quotas retrospectively, 2 months previous, taking 3 months to make the decision. What your reps need to know is you're going to be fair, and that's a brand that you've built up over time with them. I'd also say once you lower quotas, the chance of taking that quota up the following year, even though the conditions might actually be reset or even more favorable, are really challenging just from a change control and behavior standpoint. So yeah, I'm not a fan of moving quotas. I would say, let me finish. What I would say is spiffs, incentives, short-term behavioral recognition, saying, look, you're not closing deals, but if you're doing the right things, like we want you to speak with and have meetings with every single one of your customers and check in on them. If you can do all of that in the next 3 weeks, which is a Herculean effort, here's a spot bonus, because we want to reward the right behaviors. But that's in over and above what the current plan is saying. I think you just got to, I'm with Tom on this, you've got to be very careful before you start flipping around on comp plans.
Yeah, and I would liken that to the way we as businesses stand to the margins that we charge as organizations, right? Yeah. You go back to that point around cash, right? How many of your customers have come to you wanting to extend that payment plan to 90 days, or have wanted to sort of shrink the margin on what it is that you're offering from 20 to 15%? If we all just buckled at that at the first hurdle, right, we'd be sort of significantly worse off overnight. And I liken that very similarly to the way that we set and organize targets. You make data-based decisions at the point where you have a reference point to reset.
Yeah, I totally agree with that point, that you have to make data-based decisions. And someone put it in here too. I was thinking, I wonder how much of this is cultural, right? Richard's the aggressive American, right? Who's ready to make changes. Sales guys ready to crush it, right? So I totally get it. I love the fact that we can all be agreeably disagreeable about this, because I don't know that there is a right answer, which I think is the most important thing of this entire episode. Is like,
absolutely,
we're all trying to figure it out. We're all just trying to do it, But I will come back to Tom Castley's point is, regardless of the situation, goals go up anyway. So to sort of say, well, it's going to be hard to take the goals up. No, it's not. People are in sales. Don't avoid it. People know the goals change. They know that if I hit my number doesn't stay the same this year. It goes up, right? Like, that's just the rule of sales. So, but I do wonder how much of this is cultural, which I think is a whole other webinar.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, but also don't get me sidetracked on the fact that, why are you putting the quotas up on your top salesperson every year? I mean, it's literally, you end up paying for mediocrity because your best people will leave. But that's probably another webinar.
Yeah. That's right. And then you look at burn rates in sales, right? I worked in the States for 7 years, and a sort of healthy churn in sales was 60-70%. Right? Those people leave
Not
for
a
a reason.
healthy churn rate. That's not a healthy churn rate. That's poor leadership, which is the whole point of it.
But that's what it was. I mean, I was working in the
Yeah.
US. I was speaking to companies that if they had a churn rate of 60%, they were happy with that. I was like, wow, my
Because
God,
they
how do you
suck
stay?
at leadership. They don't know how to manage people, right? There's
Yeah.
not a single sales. Here's what I'll tell you. Unless you went to work for a huge company, there's not a single sales manager who was ever taught how to manage before they got promoted to management. Nobody sent you, hey, here's management 101. Here's how you motivate somebody who's unmotivated. It was like, hey, we were product experts. We were closing experts. We knew how to handle objections. Oh, look, you can run a spreadsheet. Congratulations, you got promoted. Like that's what I've seen way too much of. So some of this also comes back to, and maybe this is a good way to sort of, because I know we're getting a little close to the end, but how do you come out of this? I'm going to shift this completely. We never prepped for this. How do we come out of this to help our next round of leaders be better leaders? What path are you guys seeing, right? Tom, like at Outreach, Tom Castley, have you guys put together, and maybe you haven't, I don't know.
Yeah, look, there's a huge opportunity that's coming out of this. There's a book by Skip Miller called Proactive Selling, and in that he talks about a mantra which is frequencies times competencies equals results. And there was a post somebody did the other day, and they said, well, what should we should only be rewarding results. And I'm like, yeah, that misses the point. Yeah, rewarding results is basically just paying for teleportation. Nobody knows what's happened in between, and you can't repeat it. Frequencies are the things that you should do more often. If you do these things more often, you're going to do better. Competencies, if you do those frequencies better with a higher skill, then you're going to improve. Add the two together is significant. In the current environment where we're all remote, one is, every single email activity meeting is being tracked and logged because now it's all happening via, Zoom call and what have you, or other conferencing tools. We've got conversational intelligence tools which are doing transcription. So we know, right, the frequencies are being tracked. Competencies, we can listen to every call, should drive results. Never before in sales have we had the technology stack that means there is nowhere for a sales leader to hide. We are moving to a point where the idea of a sales leader just being the superstar salesperson who ride-alongs with every mediocre rep and somehow manages to get to their number is over. The new generation of sales leader will be an enabler, will be a coach, and will look to drive exponential growth. Somebody asked the book to recommend at this moment in time. I would recommend Dave Marquette's Turn the Ship Around. It's called the leader model. Move decisions to the point of information. If a sales leader is not a coach, we've totally missed an opportunity that this macro change has brought into our organizations.
That's great. Tom, what do you see? You're on the hiring side, right? Like, is leadership becoming a more prevalent question, do you think, in the interview process, or will it become that?
I think just if I go back to the previous question about what is the future of our managers, right? So what are our managers going to sort of learn from this? I think they'll look back at this personally and think, right, this is actually what made them as a manager. They're learning techniques around remote management, managing in a flexible environment. Yeah. Probably, again, some companies are far more advanced in this than others, but for us, they're learning a skill that maybe we had planned for them to start developing in 3 years' time. They've learned it overnight, right? And through, and I think I talked about L&D. I think learning and development is going to be key to all of our future success around how we develop our future leadership in this new way of working. And I think going back to Tom's point, and I don't know if it was one of the books that mentioned it, for me, even more reason now around the use of data to enable all of our decision making around our everything that we do is even more important than ever. In terms of leadership through hiring decisions, I think the profile of people that organizations will hire moving forward have also changed overnight, right? the idea that we're hiring regular full-time employees that come in at sort of 8 o'clock in the morning and check out at 5 in the evening and are looking for a full-time salary and a prorated 15% bonus have gone, right? I think the opportunity, and again, I talk to the STEM opportunity here, the opportunity that has created itself during this pandemic for areas within STEM have been enormous, right? So if I look at the way that people work within the life sciences sector, for example, there's opportunity for them to be working on 4 different COVID-related products with 4 different companies at the moment, right? And working on multiple projects concurrently, whether that be in IT, in life sciences, across engineering, and even within sort of financial technology, is what we've seen as a result of this. Everybody wants the same thing. They can't have it. So individuals are offering their services to multiple organizations at the same time. And I think the future of work here will be what is seen as the legacy of all of this.
What do you think? So you just said you think the day will shift, right? You won't be an 8 to 5 kind of thing, 50 base, 50 comp. What do you think it's going to look like?
So if I look at what we do, right, so we provide flexible working solutions to organizations that want specific talent that's in very short supply, right? So these people don't work in full-time jobs. They're not FTEs, right? They're skilled contractors. And so based on the skills that they have and the needs of organizations, they'll be working across 5 or different clients, maybe working 80, 90 billable hours a week, right? But with 5 different customers. And this is what I think ultimately will happen in the future. We talk about millennials. This is what they want. They want project-based, deliverable assignments that they complete in 6 months rather than being a slave to a corporation. And if I look at the skills that are required from a lot of these organizations just through this pandemic, everybody wants the same thing. And there's not enough to go around. So the nature of work, the way in which we hire these people, but also the number of commitments that an individual have to a number of different employers will only become exaggerated through this.
So you're saying that the employee will change from a regular employee to someone who's sort of part-time, but they'll have 3 or 4 different companies they work for?
Absolutely. Yeah. The future of flexibility.
That can't happen on the sales side. That can happen on the research side. I can't help it on the sales side.
That might not happen on
that momentum.
No, maybe not on the sales side. Again, maybe I'm just talking about sort of general trends that I think will come from this. Again, if I look at it at the moment, what clients are asking us for at the moment is it's very interesting. They need somebody with regulatory experience for 15 hours a week, right? That person can offer that service to 10 different clients.
Yeah, totally. We've already started to see that in sort of this virtual assistant space, right? Like I've got a VA and I've got X number of hours a week that I use that person for. And you can certainly do that. It'll be interesting. And I can see that on the scientific research side to some extent, but then I also wonder if that science mind is like, wait, I haven't finished this project. Now I got to go start this project. It'll be fascinating to see how that rolls out. Tom, Tom Castley, what do you think is going to change and shift in the sales side as we start to come out of this, right? More flexible work hours and working conditions, not going to the office all the time?
Well, do you know the biggest thing that's happened is trust. If I think about the reason why 100% of like SDRs, although actually again this is a cultural thing in the US, a lot of SDRs, business development reps, are remote. If you look at the Bridge report and Topo, it'll tell you 50%. But lots of sales teams, inside sales teams, being office-based, and we're spending a fortune on bricks and mortar to house them, was a lack of trust. Well, guess what? We just had that excuse ripped away from us in a day for a lot of organizations where they all went remote. And I keep hearing organizations tell me, wow, my team's like smashing it. Their productivity's gone up. So the big reaction will be, does everybody come back to work? How do we work in a hybrid? Where at the moment we're remote, the next big change will be, how do we do hybrid? When is it perceived as used to be, it was a perk to be able to work from home on a Friday. Well, if we give people the choice, are we saying it's not a perk or it is a perk? There's going to be some really interesting corporate dynamics as we come back. Yeah. And looking at, where do we put people based on performance? If they're smashing it, then let them stay at home. If they're not, well, then you need to have new measures in place. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting, 6 to 18 months.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, at least here in the States too, is that it's also a legal issue, right?
Yeah.
Like, in terms of tracking hourly employees and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
don't know how it is in the UK. If, an
Can be.
SDR are they're paid by the hour, you got to track their work. Then you have this ability to do flex, which is great because it is nice that, we can work from home and, if I need to go do something, I can. And I love the trust thing that's, being forced upon people. I think you nailed it on that, Tom. It will be interesting to see what those next 6 to 18 months are like. We're getting to the end. I each want to give you a chance. If people want to get in touch with you, Tom Way, where can they get a hold of you? How can they get a hold of you? And let them know what they should get a hold of you for.
So if you need any STEM contractors anywhere across the globe, we're more than happy to assist. I'm more than happy to share my personal details with anybody through this call. Available on LinkedIn. More than happy to discuss, connect, and share ideas. So yeah, it's I'm looking at some of the questions.
Be a man. Give out your cell phone. Give out your cell phone. Give out your mobile. Come on.
What, you want it now?
Yeah, but why not?
Not giving it out on a recorded video. I'm more than happy to connect with anybody on LinkedIn.
Tom, that's the worst sales excuse I've ever heard in my life. My cell phone number is 415-596-9149. Anybody can call me anytime. Call me right now if you want. I don't care. So
there you go.
Just busting your chops a little bit. Tom Castley, what do you got?
Yeah, so obviously the brand is pretty well known in outreach in that we sponsor this webinar. Best way to contact me, first name, last name at outreach.io, also via LinkedIn. Look, I'm just passionate about selling, upskilling the global workforce, making sales respected and fashionable again. Nothing in business gets done until something is sold. And I would love the rest of the world to be as passionate about that industry as the US is. And we're seeing it happen. So yeah, shoot me up.
When sales is done right, it's a very noble profession.
Oh,
and
100%.
That is, and I would say that any career can be a noble profession when it's done right. It's not just sales. Marketing's the same way, like not spamming people. Hiring, HR, finding people to help you hire the right people, understanding that, someone like Tom is there to help you from wasting your time with the wrong candidates, right? Like, what can you do when you get that time back? So all these things are super important. Really, really appreciate that. And of course, on behalf of Outreach and Sales Hacker and everyone involved, we really appreciate it. I wanted to sort of cover, where we went. We started with sort of remain calm, right? Talk about having some confidence in your message, even if your message, hopefully doesn't have to change too much, but communication is key. We talked about motivation on a certainly high level of things. We talked about what the future is going to look like moving forward, and we're all trying to figure it out, but we don't necessarily know. And I just want to say thanks to both the Toms for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, thanks very much. Like the surf cap as well, Richard. Just my cheap shot back at you. Looks really good.
That's good. You can come to my surfing sales event. There's my shameless plug. So
yeah,
awesome. Thanks everybody. Good to see you. Thanks everybody for joining in.